Welcome to another episode of the Carolyn Glick Middle East News Hour. Big news in Israel this week. After we went all the way to Ukraine last week, we're coming back home to Israel this week because last week the government decided that it didn't want to exist anymore, and the Knesset is poised. We're filming this on Sunday evening, and the Knesset is poised to disperse itself later this week, and elections are supposed to be held sometime between the end of October and the beginning of November of this year. In the meantime, Naftali Bennett will be stepping down as prime minister for the interim, and foreign minister Yair Lapid, under their coalition agreement, will become acting prime minister for the next 3 months during the interim government ahead of the elections. So we're facing a changing of the guards at the top from Naftali Bennett to Yair Lapid. We're facing elections. And we're facing a lot of uncertainty. So I wanted to talk about all of this with my friend and erstwhile co-host on this show, Gadi Taub. So first of all, Gadi, welcome back to the show.
Shalom from Tel Aviv.
Shalom, shalom. So let's start with the news of the government's decision, or Naftali and Yair Lapid's decision, which came as a bit of a surprise, because I mean we were going towards that moment for some time, but it took a year for it to happen, and then all of a sudden it happened very suddenly. So first of all, can you just give me your sense of why it happened last week? What happened between the two of them that suddenly not only did Naftali Bennett, because for several weeks before they made the announcement, Naftali Bennett was hoping or jockeying for the leftist components of the government to bring it down so that he would be able to remain prime minister during the interim period of the elections. And then suddenly it just seemed to surrender completely to Yair Lapid and said, okay, I'm resigning, and Yair Lapid is going to be taking over for me. Can you give me your sense of what happened behind the scenes, or how we're supposed to look at what happened in front of the scenes?
So I'm not sure that I'm a good source of information about that, but
but you're a good source of analysis.
But what my take on this government was that it wouldn't last more than half a year, and all my friends said it would last 4 years, because these people either they hang together or they will hang separately, or in the more Hebrew metaphor, either they swim together or they sink separately, because they have more or less committed electoral suicide, or that's how it looked in the beginning. And both extreme guesses were wrong. To me, it's a surprise that it held for 1 year, because my reasoning was that they cannot possibly agree on any policy, because these are the components of this government are so varied and so adversarial to each other that the minute they have to decide anything that's important in security, the minute there will be something like the May pogroms, or the minute there will be something like a rocket attack from Gaza, they will be locked between the left-wing conception of complete surrender and right-wing activism. And what was wrong in this analysis is that the components of this coalition who originally belonged to the right have completely betrayed the right. And it's amazing to see how Naftali Bennett is now speaking the language of left-wing progressives on everything. And Gideon Saar was the head of, who is now a minister of justice, and is the head of the, we keep calling them parties. They're not parties, they're electoral organization, dictatorial organizations that are almost like a company where the CEO holds 100% of the shares. Because
you're right, because I mean, these just to make it clear, I think Likud is the only party at this point, a little bit.
Meretz.
Right, exactly. So that's what I was going to say. And then the smaller parties, which are now the much smaller parties, which are Labor and Meretz parties, that actually have institutions, that have party institutions, that have branches, that have members, that have everything. All of these other
they have an election process where you can compete for
primaries.
The top spot. Yeah, it's primaries or some combination, mostly primaries. I wish they had some combination of systems like the British system, where not everything is primaries. There's some to the Merkaz, to the what do you call
Central
the
committee
caucus,
gets to a
the
point.
Central Committee, and the head of the party. But you're right. There are only a handful of these, and the others, especially the large Yesh Atid, which means there is a future.
Lapid's party.
Yeah, I keep calling them "there is no past," because
right,
this is the whole orientation is completely devoid of any connection to any tradition or obligation to values.
But before, I actually want you to talk a little bit about your postmodernist theory of Yair Lapid, which we were mentioning before the program, because I think you're hitting the nail right on the head. But just to round it out so people understand, parties like Yair Lapid's Yesh Atid or There's a Future, Benny Gantz's Blue and White, and Victor Lieberman's Israel Beitenu, Israel's Our Home, Naftali Bennett's Yamina Party to the right, when all he did was go way to the left. All of these parties are parties that were established in order to run for the Knesset by a bunch of people who were brought together by the leader of the party, Naftali Bennett, Yair Lapid, Avigdor Lieberman.
And so what happens, structurally, what happens is, since there is one dictator controlling a number of seats, Yair Lapid has 19 seats by himself. So they can complete, they have no obligation to a base of voters, they can completely shift. And this is what happened. They
have a base of voters. They have the voters that gave Yair Lapid 19 seats in the Knesset. And those voters have certain expectations from Yair Lapid.
Yes, but what I'm saying is, between elections, they have no obligations. This is what they said about Naftali Bennett, right? He took these 6 seats from the voters, 7 before Shikli left the party, and he could completely transfer them to the other side of the political spectrum based on his own decision and nothing else.
Right, so he had no central committee that he had to report to. He didn't have any branches that could call him up in the middle of the night screaming at him. And plus he had the support of the right-wing media to do it, because the right-wing media, especially Makor Rishon, which is a newspaper that has become a very sectoral paper of the national religious community, has been really motivated for the past few years under its current editor, Chagai Segal, mainly by an extraordinary hatred for Netanyahu. So they were willing to back this. And then later, my own former paper, Yisrael Hayom, also got on board with this thing. But they have something that's different from traditional Likud governments, from the Likud, et cetera, because the Likud gets terrible press. It's hounded by the legal fraternity for anything that it does. Everybody has been sort of aghast and jaw agape for the past year, watching the speed of the political appointments, of the patronage appointments that the coalition members have made in the public service in Israel, in the civil service in Israel, and in all kinds of public boards and government-funded think tanks and other things. All of these plum positions that you don't have to raise money for because the taxpayers have to pay for you. They've done it at warp speed. But the problem, and they say, why can't the Likud do that? Well, they can't do it because every single appointment that the Likud does is automatically vilified, criminalized as a criminal act, as bribery or whatever, by the media and then by the legal fraternity. So the Likud has been paralyzed by the ruling class in Israel for the past 15 or so years. And then these guys come in, and in 1 year, they appointed more people to these positions than Netanyahu and his governments were able to appoint over the past 12 years if they were in power.
Yeah, it's the left knows how to rule.
Well, the left rules through the non-elected institutions that it sees control over. No, it's important. Let me just make one more point before you interrupt me. The point that I wanted to make here is that when you look at all of these parties, aside from Likud, Labor, and Meretz, you see that we have a Knesset that's populated by parties that have, as Gadi was arguing, don't have accountability to voters, don't have accountability to party institutions. They're effectively the guy in charge, and whoever the 7 dwarfs or 20 dwarfs are that, that he brings on board to his Snow White, and then they're able to rule through the support that they receive from the unelected ruling class in Israel, whether it's the media and academia or whether it's the legal fraternity in Israel.
Yeah, the judiciary.
So this is a completely non-democratic oligarchy, essentially, that has gotten itself behind this government, which is populated by parties that don't have to give an accounting to voters.
And so to return to the original question, this was an extremely unstable system. And I was wrong because it actually survived a much longer time than I thought, because it has this flexibility that these guys who decide to remain on their chairs no matter what, at their posts no matter what, have a very large leeway in terms of ideological flip-flops. And we see this especially on the right. So I mentioned Gideon Sa'ar, who once held the banner of restraining the judiciary, and now he's there.
What do you mean once? I mean, he ran on this last year, right? I mean, this was his ticket. This is what he was saying that he was going to do.
Yeah, I read the chapter in his book. He published a small book.
You were the one.
Yeah. I think only the campaign bought books. But it's called Conversations on the Road with Gideon Sa'ar. I don't know what road it is because he doesn't have a driver's license. But
this is true.
But he was in that book. He was not all that hawkish about the judiciary. He was already talking about side issues. But he once was one of the big hopes on the right for restraining the judiciary. Now, as Minister of Justice, he helped appoint progressive justices, or Supreme Court judges, as we call them here. He helped strengthen the Solicitor General. What do you call that? The AG, the Attorney General, because in our system, he's both. He's Attorney General and also the how do you call it, advisor, the legal advisor to the cabinet or to the
and it actually does parallel. I hadn't thought of it, the Solicitor General, because he's supposed to defend the government before the court. But what's nice about our system is that the Attorney General, Solicitor General, legal advisor to the government gets to decide whether or not he wants.
And they're all the same person.
Right, it's all one person, and he gets to decide whether the government deserves to be defended before the Supreme Court when it's sued. So this is something that I'm pretty sure doesn't exist anywhere else. And here, just on that count,
and Gideon Sa'ar, just let me finish this point. Gideon Sa'ar supports now supported and advanced. I'm not sure what his last position is. What we call here Chok HaNe'asham. The coalition is actually going to outlaw the opposition leader Netanyahu from running in the election.
Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's not get ahead of ourselves.
But let me just finish this sentence, because what they support is a law that will give the Attorney General, Solicitor General, a veto on who gets to be the chief executive in Israel, because they want to pass a law that if you're indicted, you can't be prime minister. So the Attorney General can actually fire the head of the executive who was elected by the people.
Okay, so before we get into the fact that they're trying to bar Netanyahu from running for office on the eve of the election, saying to the opposition, well, you don't get to choose who's going to be at the head of the opposition. We're going to tell you who has to be there, as if we weren't anti-democratic enough under this regime. Before we get to that, because that's a whole completely different discussion that we need to have. But just to go back again to this government. So this government fell, or it's about to fall. I mean, the Knesset has to dissolve itself in the next couple of days. They're thinking it might happen tomorrow. Anyway, it would be a stunner if it doesn't dissolve itself by the end of the week. And there talk in the background. A lot of people are saying, the Haredi parties are saying, the National Religious Party is saying, and elements of the Likud, including from Netanyahu's corner, are all saying, and then the the pretend right in Yamina is also saying, well, actually, we'd like to try to figure out whether we could make a new ruling coalition under Netanyahu in the existing Knesset to avoid having to go to elections. And everybody has their excuses. The Haredim are very frightened of Itamar Ben-Gvir, who is who is a faction inside of the national, or what is it called, the National Religious Party. And he has a lot of pull with young Haredim, and so they're worried about losing mandates to him in the Knesset. I think Smotrich is worried about Itamar Ben-Gvir's bargaining power when they come to decide what their list is going to be. So they have electoral reasons. The fake right that formed the government with Naftali Bennett, led by Ayelet Shaked, has a reason because she's facing political death, for what she did. She has no constituents any longer. The great white hope of the Israeli right, just a couple of years ago, the most popular minister in the Netanyahu government in 2018, 2019. She's now dead on arrival to the next election. So she's trying to avoid election. So there's a lot of talk about that, but in all likelihood, I don't think it's going to happen. Before we go on, what do you think? You think there's any chance that they're going to form a government under Netanyahu with the fake right that formed this government?
I don't know if they have a chance, but I think it would be a very, very silly move, because all they can do in this ramshackle, unstable composition of the Knesset is form a government that is about as stable as the one that just collapsed, but without the backing of the press and the judiciary. So I think the right needs a mandate from the people in order to make the changes that you and I and about over half of the Israelis think that we ought to make, and in returning Israel to being democratic.
Although, so according to the polls, victory for the right-wing bloc is anything but guaranteed. I mean, they haven't moved really since the last elections. They got, if you count Yamina as part of the right-wing bloc, and it certainly was counted by Yamina voters as part of the right-wing bloc when they went and they voted in the last elections, which I think were in March of 2021. The right wing in Israel came out with 59 out of 120 seats in the Knesset. And they're still polling around 59 seats in the Knesset, albeit with Yamina outside, but still, I mean, the 59 that the right carried in March of 2021 is what they're carrying now, which is pretty extraordinary when you think about it.
I am more optimistic than the polls are. I think.
Why?
Because many of these polls would have been touted by the left-wing media, are extremely shabby when you look at them. They're internet polls, they're text message polls, they're not in-depth polls, and the parties have very different information. Usually the reliable polls are the ones done, ordered by the political parties for their strategizing. So I think these are a little more optimistic. And besides, we don't know who is running. There is a great question of, will there be another right-wing party? And there is a huge debate on the right whether this is good or bad for us. Also, there might be a lowering of the threshold percentage you need in order to enter the Knesset, which is now very high. You need 4 seats out of 120. So it's very high, and so the risk is very large. That might change too. So I think the problem, and one more thing, the polls usually do not measure the percentage of voters, of people who actually use their vote. So if you call people and ask them, what will you vote? And you have no way of vetting away those who will not bother to exit their house.
Well, I mean, that's not true. If they were doing serious polls, they would be polling likely voters. They wouldn't just be polling anybody.
But some of these have not. Some of these,
none of them have actually. None of them have.
So they don't give a very clear indication. What gives room for optimism is, Likud voters are very complacent. Likud has won so much and so long, and even in all this series of elections that we have, it was always assumed that Netanyahu in the end will somehow be able to to create a coalition. And now they've had the experience of a left-wing government for a year. So many of these people are angry, despite the fact that the press is trying to portray this failed government as a success. So
you know what? Can we just go for a second to what you were talking about? What they're trying to do now is pass a law, even as the Knesset is dissolving itself, to block Netanyahu from forming a government. It's an extraordinary thing. It was actually something that Gideon Sa'ar ran on. He wanted not only to block Netanyahu from forming a coalition by refusing to join a coalition led by Netanyahu, but he also said from the outset that he wants to pass a law that says that anybody who's indicted, anyone who's now standing trial, anyone who's been indicted of a crime, is not allowed to form a government. And so, they're saying, oh, it's a moral thing. We wouldn't want an indicted suspect, a criminal suspect, to be able to form a government. But of course, as you were saying beforehand, all this does is give the attorney general the power to overthrow a prime minister, because as we're seeing now in Netanyahu's trial, our former attorney general, Avichai Mandelblit, made up a definition of bribery from whole cloth, and he indicted Netanyahu on this imaginary crime of bribery that he and then Chief Prosecutor Shai Nitzan invented, saying that receiving positive coverage or just deviate reception for your questions, which is insane. If you ask for a response or ask for something from a media organization and they don't hang up on you, then that's essentially what happened with Netanyahu. Then that's considered to be a disparate or deviantly positive willingness to receptiveness, to your request, which is a made-up concept that only exists in relation to wanting to indict Netanyahu in a legal coup to throw him out of office. So he's been indicted on these fake charges. And now we're having to deal with these fake charges being essentially the basis for a new draft law that would block him from forming a government. So you are starting to give your dim assessment of all of this, and I'd like you to continue now that we finally arrived at it. I have a list. See, we hadn't gotten it to it that like me and Joe Biden, enter on the right, say hello, right? So I've got I think number 3 is the prime minister's law, and we were still on 1.5 when you had to interject it. So we can't do that. We have script.
You first of all send me this piece of paper next time, and second of all, in the case of Biden, it's called a cheat sheet and cheat sheet. I know it actually works both ways, and in your case, it's called a lineup, Carol. So
this is what a lineup is. Good to look at how professional I'm becoming.
This show has matured, and now you have a lineup. That's what it's called.
And you went and you're wrecking it. So anyway, why don't we get to number 3 now?
So at number 3, where's my lineup?
I just gave it to you. I'll give you number 4 when I'm ready.
This law, it's amazing because you see all the puppets from the anti-democratic. There's a future party, the people who are nominated by a little dictator who refuses to allow, by his party rules, refuses to allow people to run against him. And they preach us that they say it is undemocratic that a man who is indicted would run for office. Why is it anti-democratic? Why does no democracy in the world have a rule that indictment prevents you from being elected? Well, they don't have such a rule, because if they would have such a rule, then the police and the attorney general can replace the government at will. And I remind Israelis what a complicated procedure it is to remove a sitting president in America. And the people who do it, though it is the parallel system of a trial, are only elected officials. It is unthinkable that civil servants will eliminate the results of an election. and they're preaching this to us as a democratic thing. And also, I love the fact that in Israel, some of the judicial pundits, you say, the journalists, analysts who cover the judiciary, yeah. they are PR people for the Attorney General. That's what they are. They don't really cover anything, and they're handed constant leaks, which are not leaks, because leaks are for whistleblowers. This is the official system working through journalists to feed the public with its preferred narrative. And I'm saying, for a long time, I've been saying, we think of these as the journalists are slavish to the Attorney General, to the Israel's parallel of the FBI, while it may be viewed as the exact opposite. It is, since the press is a party, it's a left-wing establishment, the Attorney General office are the investigative arm of the left-wing press. This is why, if you want to look seriously at Netanyahu's trial, you realize that, exactly like in the case of Donald Trump, the leaks are the center of it, because this is not a judicial process. This is a public campaign to discredit Netanyahu and to remove him from office. And this law is a part of this system, so that the whole investigation exists in order to feed the press information and sometimes disinformation with which to vilify Netanyahu and hurt him hurt his electoral prospects. Oh, I'm losing my English. We should do this.
I have to have you on more often so you can practice.
Yeah. So at my daily English class, and so I think that this law is just one more cog in the system by which the press and its unholy marriage to the law enforcement wants to control the ability of Israelis to choose their own politicians. This is what it's about, and it's not surprising that now they support this law, because this law will give their junta the ability to decide who gets elected.
Again, this is just the coup de grace of the legal fraternity's coup. I mean, it's always funny to watch when, we both of us do a lot of television, and we're in these panels with leftists, and it's always amusing to watch them say, well, he's been indicted, and you just can't have people who've been indicted, or on its face this law makes sense, maybe we oppose it because it's so obviously anti-Netanyahu, but we really think that this is an important piece of legislation, because we have to do, but and then the last thing that they say, which I find even more amusing, is that they say, oh, there's no clear evidence that Netanyahu getting indicted in the middle of an election campaign had anything to do with him going down in public support, that, it didn't have any impact on voters at all. In fact, he got stronger, which is, it's a lie, just looking at, the way that the election returns went, over those four campaigns. And yet they make these claims as if we're supposed to believe them because they say them with a straight face. But it's very clear that had Avichai Mandelblit, the Attorney General, not reinvented the concept of what bribery is specifically for Netanyahu, and everybody gone along with it in the ruling class, and pretended that there's nothing off about this, we wouldn't have had a change of government. I mean, Netanyahu would have won in the first round of elections, and that would have been the end of it. You can add to that very serious questions about the vote counting and whether the Likud and the New Right were cheated out of 5 mandates for the right or not. But there's a good case to be made that was true. But just putting that aside and pretending that there was nothing wrong with the vote counts in any of the 4 rounds of elections, it's crazy to think that there was no impact, that Avichai Mandelblit's going to war against the sitting prime minister during election season didn't bring about his downfall, which is why they have this picture of Avichai Mandelblit standing behind the table when the new government was about to be signed in, and he's taking a picture of the cards, of the name cards of all of the people who are about to be sworn in to be the new government of Israel with Netanyahu out. And it was him saying, I did this. This government exists because of, look at, this is the biggest achievement of my lifetime. And so, here we are, we've been through a coup of lawyers that ousted the sitting prime minister by negating the rule of law in Israel. And now we have the people who are the chief beneficiaries of the coup, the outgoing government, trying to make it perpetual by saying Netanyahu is never going to be allowed to run again because we've indicted him on made-up charges. And I think that the fact that we've reached this point in Israel is alarming in the extreme. And the fact that the media, of course, is backing this is even more terrifying in a way, because it means that there aren't any public checks and balances that they care about. The only checks and balances that exist any longer, to the extent that the vote count is authentic, is the election, which brings us back to the question that I asked you earlier about what you thought of the idea of forming an alternative government under the current Knesset. And I have to agree with you. The right wing needs to go to the voters. We need to get 61 plus members of the Knesset to vote for massive, extensive reform of our legal system, because otherwise, we are not right now existing in a democratic reality in Israel at all on any level. And if we want to rebuild it, then we need to oust these unelected lawyers from the power that they've seized.
But this is a very, very tricky thing to do when the head of your coalition is himself indicted. We are facing a very, very difficult battle, and this has been a topic of contention on the right in Israel. And I found myself arguing different arguments at different times, according to what I sensed was the mood. And I can't say I've decided on one of them, because on the one hand, it's really problematic to reform the judicial system while you yourself are under its investigation. On the other hand, this is, of course, what they did for this very purpose.
Right.
And add this to the mix that Netanyahu never lifted a finger in order to do anything against them, because he believed, based on the Israeli opinion, that's my guess, I haven't heard it from him, that he believed that if you leave these guys alone, they'll leave you alone. Because the experience was that the people who get indicted for no reason, what we call kafulotik, he was framed, the people who get framed are the people who want to reform the judiciary. And it's there's a staggering list of coincidences. Whenever some minister of justice wanted to create some reform, he suddenly found himself with extreme bad luck in terms of the legal system. And so he was investigated for some invented charge repeatedly. So Netanyahu thought, if you leave these guys alone, they'll leave you alone. And he was wrong, because this is ultimately, this is the last act
frontier
in a long drama. No, it's the last act in a long drama in which the deep state is trying to overtake the real state or the democratic state. And now we've reached the pinnacle of the pyramid, where the judicial system is actually aiming at removing the chief executive and thus establishing its final authority over everything. And I emphasize that I don't use this word everything lightly. I mean, there is nothing that they think is not under their purview. So this has been a long time in the making. But what my other argument was that now that Netanyahu is with his back to the wall, he will have to do something.
And but I'll just add to what you said before, that say Netanyahu steps aside and Yisrael Katz or Nir Barkat somebody else comes in to replace him, and whoever it is becomes the next prime minister. We can just call him Mr. X. We don't know, and we'll pretend even for a second that he might be halfway good. Mr. X will find himself under criminal investigation tomorrow, which I think, the counter argument to yours saying, well, look, when you've already been indicted by these crooks, you can't fight them because they already indicted you, which has a lot to recommend it. The fact is that if another guy comes in to run the show instead of Netanyahu, because of that, he's going to be indicted.
Yeah. So it's so there's no postponing it, I think. But in order to do this, we need 61 is not enough. We need something more stable than 61 to have a public mandate.
And I don't know, Gadi. I mean, I guess I agree with you, but on the other hand, say that if the Likud got 70 people behind it for judicial reform and they actually did it, the left wing would go berserk. I mean, all we have to do is look to the way that the left of the United States is burning down the country.
Yeah, I was just going to say that because it's been on my mind for a while to say. There was a psychologist in Harvard named Lawrence Kohlberg, and he's mainly known for his famous pupil, who was Carol Gilligan, the feminist.
Yeah, and she was actually quite good. She insisted that girls and boys were very, very different from each other. She had a fantastic book that I read in college called In a Different
Voice.
Voice,
She backtracked from this.
Did she?
Yeah, because she backtracked. I have a whole theory of why it happened in the middle of the 80s. So her book was published 82. She was a big star.
In a Different Voice. Are you talking about that book?
Yeah, that book. Yeah, in 84, she was Woman of the Year on Ms. Magazine. And then she disappeared. And I have a theory about why, but this is not why I mention her, because Lawrence Kohlberg tried to create a hierarchy, a system which would analyze and classify moral development. And I don't remember all the 6 stages that he had, but what I remember is that he said children don't internalize rules. And so when their rules are against them, they want to change them. So that if you play chess with a 7-year-old kid, and he said, "Oh, Daddy, can I just one more time have 2 goes?" Because he sees how if you just change the rule, he can win. And he doesn't yet internalize that without the rules, there's no meaning to winning. And the left is exactly like that. Every time that there is a decision that they don't like, they want to change the rules.
Well, they have a temper tantrum and they want to change the rules, and they're willing to bring down everyththing with their losing
so
their,
after Donald Trump's victory, we would trash the Electoral College. After Roe versus Wade being overturned, we don't need the Senate anymore because it gives too much representation to the body that approves justices, and so on and so on.
So that's why I think that this idea that, we need more than an absolute majority, which is crazy because the judicial revolution that was enacted in the 1990s was done essentially without anybody noticing by Aaron Barak, who was the Chief Justice of the court. And he took this basic law that the Knesset passed in a lackadaisical kind of way. How many people voted for it?
I think it was 32 against
21 or something. I mean, like
no, 21. No, 21 were opposed. It was 32
a very large majority of members of Knesset thought it was so unimportant that they didn't
come to the vote.
They didn't even vote. And now we're saying that in order to even start thinking about rolling back this revolution that was done by judicial fiat behind everybody's back, and while we were all, thinking about other things, that you need an absolute majority of the Knesset. And now here you are, the guy who casts aspersions on the right saying it doesn't know how to rule, saying, well, we actually, an absolute majority of members of Knesset isn't sufficient. We need more.
No.
But again, any majority that they have, if they have a majority of 90, if they have a majority of 90, they will still be burned in effigy by the media.
Yes, but we are Democrats, and it's important for us, and we need to.
An absolute majority is absolutely perfect as far as I'm concerned.
It's enough, but it's not perfect. I would want a majority that actually represents our weight in public opinion, and the system here is completely crazy. This is not on your lineup, obviously, but nothing will be healed in our system before we change our crazy, ridiculous, extreme system of election. We are operating under an impossible system. So
well, you may be right. I don't know, but I don't think that we'll be able to do any significant reform of our electoral system until after we've done reform of our judicial system, because you can't go after the weak kid before you go after the bully. You know, I mean, the electoral system is bad in large part because the power of the politicians has been completely seized by unelected lawyers. And so I think you can't really get anything done until you rectify, at least begin to rectify that anomaly.
And one thing is that we got some lessons from this government, who just ran roughshod over anyone who they've actually changed the proportions of the coalition and the opposition in Knesset committees.
Right.
Try to say this to Americans. I mean, now the January 6th committee has almost done that, right? Nancy
right.
Pelosi.
Well, they did it. I mean, they seized the right of the opposition to appoint its own representatives.
And so that's what they did here, all across the board, in all the committees. They just defied all the rules. And of course, in their mirror world language, they're doing this to protect democracy from the opposition, right?
Again, I think 61 votes is well and enough.
I will not stand in your way when you do it. I just want more if possible. I think it would be very hard because look, what happens now, look at this coalition. Now we are all hugging Idit Silman, who is the what do you say? How do you call Arik?
She's the first deserter. She's the first one, right? Or defector from the regime.
Right. She was a defector from the coalition, and she defected over matzot in hospitals.
Not having unkosher Passover food being allowed into hospitals.
Yeah, and so imagine that our whole system is dependent on, I don't know, I said such bad things about Idit Silman that I found it hard to hug her. Later, also she's religious, and but she is a would it be polite enough if I say she's a featherweight? So a featherweight can collapse a coalition on a nothing. Now these people, I'm going to be specifically mindful of my politeness. They hold everyone, as it's now in Israeli political jargon, by the throat, by a threat of criminal investigations. So you're going to have a 61 majority, and you're telling me that an attorney general will not be able to find a weak link? I hope so, but I don't think we should bet our money on that.
All right. Well, how about we not bet our money on it, but let's just move for the last part of our discussion today. What?
Yair Lapid.
Well, okay. Let's not move to the last part. Let's move to the second to last part. I forgot about Yair Lapid because I think you have you have a very, I mean, it's tongue in cheek, but not really. You know, Yair Lapid is one of the most vapid, shallow, stupid men that we've ever had. Perhaps the stupidest man who's ever been in a position to become the prime minister of Israel. And you know, we can talk a little bit about how, I mean, his father is the late Tommy Lapid, who's founded the Shinui Party, which was also an anti-religious party, but he was the director of Israeli television, and he was an irascible schmuck, I guess, but he was a real figure in Israeli letters and Israeli journalism, and then later in Israeli politics. And Yair Lapid was his spoiled son. You know, Yair Lapid had everything given to him on a golden platter. He didn't even have to finish high school, and he got all the plum assignments.
And I'll give you, because it's striking that Tommy Lapid was a guy who didn't care what people thought about what he said. And
I don't know. He probably did care, but he didn't care about what we thought of what he said.
No. He would, in just social situation, he would say things that were incendiary, and he would not mind throwing these Molotov bottles when he believed something. By the way, he was very fierce against the judiciary. And it's very nice. People post this to his son often. Also, you can find Yair Lapid saying opposite things. He has no opinions, whatever. He just has cliches. But I'll give you a perfect metaphor from this, which is a variation of David Riesman, the author of The Lonely Crowd in the 50s. Some people have a gyroscope in their own internal values, and they make their way in the world according to their conscience inside. Other people don't have a gyroscope, they have a radar. And so the way they maneuver in the world is by collecting the expectations and trying to answer them. And this is Yair Lapid. His father was Yikov Adin et Hahar. You know, when he had an opinion, he would crash through everything and defend it and fearlessly. Yair Lapid is for every crowd just trying to find the thing that he's expected to say. Now, this is extremely dangerous. It's an extremely dangerous thing when you see that when he goes to speak to progressive foreign ministers in the European Union, he actually allows them to dissolve the idea of anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is just, he stole something from Amos Oz and something from that, and Amos Oz would never say such a thing about anti-Semitism. He said anti-Semitism is the surname, it's the family name to many kinds of hates. The hates between the Hutu and the Tutsi, and the hate of homosexuals, and the hate of this, and it's just hate speech. And so when he's speaking to others, the son of a Holocaust survivor is willing to let go of the moral demand that the Jewish people is making against a world who's bent for thousands of years on destroying it. So this is the kind of nothing that he is. And when you look at his opinions, people mistake his pathos for belief. He is a television presenter, and he can fake any. I don't remember which comedian said that. It's an American comedian who said the key to acting is authenticity. If you can fake that, then you've made it. So he is that. He is the complete fake of everything. Everything. You know, I have a friend who is an anti-Zionist who studied with me at school. He now lives in New York. And he said, while Yair Lapid had a weekly column in Shiva Yamim, in the weekend magazine of Yediot Achronot, he said, you know, every time I miss Israel, I open Shiva Yamim and read Yair Lapid and remember why I don't want to return. Yair Lapid, if Zionism fails, the face of the failure would be Yair Lapid, because this is neo-nothing in Hebrew.
It's like the way said, you know, this is the way the world ends. This is the way the world ends. This is the way the world ends. Not with a bang, with a whisper, or with a nihilistic nothing who's in charge of a great country and a great nation. And
a final remark on that, because it's one of the topics that gets me fired up. When we were on this panel together in Yara
on Channel 14 on Saturday
night. Saturday night. I asked them to show Yair Lapid's Facebook page, and I tell your viewers also, look up his Facebook page, because his background photo is one of him and Joe Biden while he's making a joke, and Joe is laughing, and you just understand that an Israeli prime minister has to be ready for a fight with Joe Biden over Iran, but he thinks that being an elected politician is a celebrity contest, and the one who gets the most votes is the most popular. Obviously, isn't that obvious? So he wants to put pictures of himself with a larger celebrity.
It's basically the Israeli version of a homecoming king. You know, he's mistaken a popularity contest with political leadership. You know, if you're the most popular guy in the class, that doesn't mean that you should be the president of the United States or the prime minister of Israel. But he begs to differ with that. He thinks that absolutely the homecoming king is the most appropriate person to be the president of the United States or the prime minister of Israel. And you know, you said something in the show that I wasn't sure I agreed with, because you said that you thought that Yair Lapid, the nihilist, the postmodern empty suit, is more dangerous as the prime minister than Naftali. And I want you to explain that. But first, I want to tell you why I think you might not necessarily be correct. And I mean, there are two reasons. One is that Naftali Bennett disavowed everything that he stood for his entire political career in order to become prime minister and during his tenure as prime minister. And he gave these simultaneously broadcast interviews to the three major stations, not Channel 14. We were there attacking him, on the station while he was giving all of these farewell interviews to everybody else. But he totally disavowed the right wing. He said it would be a disaster for Israel if the right wing government is formed. This is a guy who called his party Yamina, to the right of Likud. And now this is what he's saying. So, I mean, on the one hand, he has been operating as a progressive prime minister from day one. And more to the point, the real leader of the government throughout has been the guy who crowned him fake prime minister a year ago, which is Yair Lapid. So Yair Lapid has really been running the show completely while Bennett has been the factotum prime minister. So, and yet you said that you thought that Lapid, that for his caretaker government for the next 3 months is going to be even more dangerous. Why do you think that?
Because I think that when you have someone who is a complete and total postmodernist, then you don't know what to expect. And when that person is maneuvering in the world with a radar only according to expectations and with this, what he has in his head as a celebrity contest, this will be the most accommodating combination to the progressive foreign policy of the Biden administration. These are the people with whom he wants to find favor. I was actually, this is not just an analytic hypothesis. I have heard this from a senior American advisor to an important politician who said that Yair Lapid is just the puppet of the Democratic Party. He's just their puppet. And Naftali Bennett, I think, is less attuned to them, and he's no less an opportunist, sure. But yet the only motivation that I can discern in Yair Lapid is to get a pat on his
back,
oily hair from the establishment of the Democratic Party, who are the cool kids in his mind. And so he will say, and he has no, I have a constant refrain on Twitter. Yair Lapid's words have no meaning.
Right.
On the eve of the election, he said, how dare you think that I would sit in one government with the anti-Zionist Arab parties? He even called them before that, he called them the Zuebis, which is a derogatory way of using a surname in order to
the surname of an Arab member of Knesset
of many, because it's a big
but who is so anti-Israel. This is at the time Hanin Zouabi, that she not only supported Hezbollah, but she was on the Hamas terror ship, the Mavi Marmara, that tried to break the naval blockade that Israel had lawfully set up against Hamas-ruled Gaza. So she actually committed what could reasonably be considered an act of war against the country while she was sitting in the Knesset. And so her name is Zouabi, and he called all of these treacherous members of Knesset from the Arab parties Zouabis. That's what he called.
So he made that argument before the election.
Right.
And right until the night of the election, he said, I would never have a government that is dependent on them. And the minute the election results came in, he said, why do you boycott the Arab parties? That's a racist thing to do. Yeah, he switched arguments completely from side to side. Now, on some humorous shows, there's a show host, by the way, it's Merav Michaeli's the husband. Yeah, she's the leader of the Labor Party. This is her husband, and he hates Yair Lapid. He has this, a Daily Show, like the Daily Show, something. So he just collects Yair Lapid's contradictory quotes, and I just saw it today, and he has a quote of him saying with this
a new one.
Pathos.
You're talking about a new one, Lior Shlein?
No, it's an old one. It's before he was Minister of Finance. He said, so he has one quote. He's saying, the Minister of Finance has to be an economist with all this pathos, and with the exact same pathos. He said, I think the Minister of Finance does not have to be an economist. And like it's the exact same sentence on before he wanted to be one and after he wanted to be one. So this is complete vapid emptiness, but it's an emptiness with an orientation. It's like a sunflower looking for the sun, and the sun, as he understands it, shines from the White House, and he will be slavish to the Democratic administration.
I think you're probably right, and that leaves us with the last thing that I really wanted to talk about with you today, which is
Roe versus Wade. No,
what? Roe versus Wade we can get to. Look, I actually, why don't we crown off this the political aspect of it before we move on to the foreign policy aspect of it? Because, you know, for me, Roe versus Wade is such an extraordinary triumph of the American system, because, you know, for so many different reasons. I'm just going to give you a few.
You mean the Dobbs or the original Roe versus Wade?
No, Dobbs, the overturning of Roe v. Wade.
Yeah, okay.
So, I mean, I was reading some of the commentary on it. And one of the things that you find is that in the 2016 election, Republicans, the majority of Republican voters said that Supreme Court appointments that would be made by the next president were one of the most important things that they were voting on. And 26% of Republican voters, so over a quarter of them, said that Supreme Court justices were the most important thing. It was their voting issue, whereas the percentage of Democrats, I think, was something like 18, according to a Washington Post report of it all. And so the Republicans just cared more. For them, this was it. They wanted a conservative court that was going to overthrow Roe v. Wade, was going to protect gun rights, and all of the other hot button issues that are what? They are examples of judicial fiat, where, according to, you know, conservatives, you're talking about the court absconding with legislative power, meaning taking it away from the people's representatives and giving it to justices who have lifelong appointments. And you had this incredible situation where, you know, the indoctrinated woke clerks that apparently, I mean, this is what the suspicion is that the person who leaked Sam Alito's draft decision on overturning Roe v. Wade was a clerk for either Sotomayor or Breyer, and this is, you know, this is what the woke law school industry is now producing, is people who have no concern whatsoever for tradition, for no respect for it. I mean, these people have lifelong appointments. They have to be able to work together, even if they're from across the political spectrum. And these young people who come in as court clerks didn't think that that was important anymore, because what's really important is the revolution. And the revolution means not changing Roe v. Wade and expanding the judicial powers that were seized in that verdict. And the Supreme Court, the conservative justices, were under physical threat from the moment that draft decision was leaked. You know,
including an attempted murder
to murder Justice Kavanaugh. And you have these violent mobs outside of their homes. They have these groups who have posted the schools that Amy Coney Barrett's children attend in the Washington area. I mean, they're threatening their kids. They're threatening the justices, and these justices didn't flinch. They didn't stand down the way that Justice Roberts stood down with the Obamacare thing when he was under attack and when he was threatened. They stood their ground. And over the past week, not only did they have the Dobbs decision, but they had a series of other landmark decisions protecting gun rights and other things. These people understood they were appointed to do something. They were appointed to pass strict constitutionalist judgments in the court. And they're sticking by their part of the bargain in the American constitutional system. And I think it's extraordinary. And when you look at that and you compare it with Gideon Sa'ar, who's a sensible, limited judiciary guy, right? He appointed four justices to the Supreme Court during his year as a justice minister. And at least two of them are radical leftists, and the other two are establishment types, which means that they will just vote as expected to vote on all of these things and go along with the judicial seizure of power from the legislature, from the people, from the government. And, the distinction couldn't be more stark. And the recommendation that that distinction makes for the American constitutional system, and for democracies that work in general with checks and balances of the three sides, and with all of it happening with the consent of the governed, I think is just unmistakable and really breathtaking. And I have to say, I have so much respect for the conservative justices who just stood their ground or standing their ground, and God bless them and protect them. That's what I have to say.
Yeah, I was just looking at the coverage here, and it's astounding.
Insane.
It was astounding to discover that the left is screaming here that
about abortions of ladies in America.
No, they're screaming about the idea that justices who represent the minority in the population will make a decision that affects everyone. And you look at our system, these are the people who are defending complete judicial supremacy, where the judges are all leftists. So this is what I meant when I said that the left is infantile in its conception of rules. It doesn't care about the rules. It only cares about the results they produce. And so, like a 7-year-old playing chess with his dad, they want to change the rules whenever the decision is not to their liking. And they don't even bother to be consistent. It's just
they don't care. And the reason that they can do that is because the media is 100% in their corner, and they're never called to account. You know, it's really amazing that, you know, somebody like Yair Lapid can get 19 mandates. I mean, it has to do with a lot of things, but one of the things that it has to do with is that he was a media personality and very popular among, you know, or the media crowd, and all of his friends are supporting him, and he gets only good press. You know, which is amazing. I mean, the same thing, obviously, Naftali, now they're saying he's one of the most historically significant prime ministers, or perhaps the most historically significant prime minister Israel has ever had. And I guess it's true because, you know, he played such a central role in transforming Israel into a post-democratic regime ruled by unelected bureaucrats. Anyway, let me just go one last thing that I wanted to touch on today, which was policy. We have America renewing nuclear talks with the Iranians, and we'll be getting into it, don't worry, because we're just ending it now. But you know, America, it wants to renew their talks with the Iranians after the Iranians have already crossed the nuclear threshold and introduced advanced centrifuges that, you know, can very speedily enrich uranium to weapons grade levels. The Americans don't care. They want to renew nuclear talks. And Biden is coming here, and now it's going to be Prime Minister Lapid, apparently, who's going to be, you know, greeting him at Ben Gurion Airport. And the Biden administration has a slew of very, very hostile policies that they want to enact in Jerusalem. And I think that they view Lapid's premiership as a perfect opportunity to do that. How concerned are you over what's going to happen over the next 3 months?
Yeah, you know, there's now, as we speak, a coordinated propaganda campaign in the Israeli media by veterans of our military establishment who support the deal. It's just unbelievable how deep this absurd policy of the Biden administration, which you reward the most fanatic regime for its aggression and allow it to rush for a nuclear bomb, is now defended in the Israeli press by supposed experts as if we've not been through Obama, as if we've not realized the idea that the JCPOA somehow stalls the Iranians has now patently being proven
to be
absurd.
A complete lie. Yeah.
And now there's people from the army establishment who are running a campaign in the press,
right,
and this is I have no doubt that behind the scenes this is an American coordinated campaign. These are, you know, all the think tanks that they pay for here, all the schmoozing, all the Vexners, the flights to their seminars. It's an American campaign. It's just infuriating how they're doing it.
And it's also very frightening because, of course, you know, what we've seen all along are two things. One is that Israel is alone in this. The Americans do not have Israel's back on preventing Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons. I mean, you could say that even of the Trump administration, because Trump said he was absolutely not going to take any military action against Iran. And since the only way to prevent Iran, I mean, there are two ways to prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons. One is to overthrow the regime, something that Trump was not willing to support. And the other one was is military strikes against their nuclear installations. And he said he would not do that either. So it's not that, Trump distinguished himself from his predecessors or his successor in his aversion to taking the kind of action you need to preventing Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons. He was much more supportive of Israel doing it on its own or with others. But it just brings back the point, makes clearer the point that Israel has to take the lead on this. And the other thing that we've learned over the years is that Israel, if it is willing to take the lead, when it is willing to take the lead against Iran, it isn't alone. It finds many, many countries that are willing to work with it, because it particularly and first and foremost, the neighbors that we have in this region who are equally threatened by Iran, whether it's Saudi Arabia and the UAE and Bahrain and all the rest of it. So I think that, when we're looking at what's happening on the ground with Yair Lapid and Biden, it's so dangerous because, every day obviously is critical when you're dealing with an existential threat. But I had my friend Dave Wormser on the show a few weeks ago, and he said to me, and I think it was on the show, and if it wasn't, I'm sure he won't mind that I mentioned a private communication, but he said Israel is really reaching a lot of red lines here and crossing a lot of them with this government. And we really need to take care of this business, which, is what is the main argument that Netanyahu gave for, wanting to form a coalition under his leadership in the current government, even at the expense of putting legal reform aside. As I said, I think that it's a non-starter and a mistake. But we have the Biden administration working with left-wing generals, both in and out of service, to try to subvert Israel's longstanding position that the nuclear deal is very bad for Israel. So far, I see that Yair Lapid is not accepting that. He spoke with Borrell, the EU's foreign policy chief, and said, it's a really bad idea to go back to the nuclear deal. Iran is just playing all of you. But I don't think that he has any pull with the Biden administration. We'll just have to see. And as for Jerusalem, he can do irrevocable harm if he allows them to open a consulate in Jerusalem. I mean, that will be a terrible thing. And it's hard to see another administration coming and standing up for Israel if Israel itself is willing to say, we don't value American recognition of Jerusalem as our capital. So, we are facing some things that we're going to have to be steeling ourselves against over the next 3 months.
Yeah, he can do enormous damage. I had an argument with a good friend of mine. I can mention his name, Ran Baratz. He's now in the States, and he's one of the best pundits. He was once Netanyahu's PR person, about what will it do electorally if 3 months of Yair Lapid will do. We were arguing if it's better to have Lapid or Bennett, which is like, how do you say in English? Nevela v'trefa. It's a choice.
It's a choice between a dead body and a carcass and
trefa. It's an unholy, something unholy.
Yeah, it's something. It's not a good thing, but it's a choice between two terrible things. And there's a much, there's an English expression with a lot more zing to it, but I can't think of it right now.
So Ran's argument is that actually electorally this would be an advantage because Lapid is going to be the contestant that is facing Netanyahu, and we will see him now in a position where he has to be responsible, because he's never responsible. He thinks of politics as PR, and right. So Corona is bad PR, right? So he was the strongest person in this coalition, but he scrupulously avoided the Corona cabinet. Whenever there's a hot issue, he doesn't touch it. And this is also his way, the way he was one of the people everyone assumes, behind promoting the original law, which started a snowball that ended with Netanyahu's indictment, which is the Israel Hayom law, the Israel Today newspaper law, which was supposed to basically hurt this newspaper in the service of the newspaper Yair Lapid worked for all his life. And what he did, he never came to the vote. There was a vote on this law, he just didn't appear. So his minions voted for it. The Yesh Atid appointed officials are they're elected by the public, but they're appointed by the Yair Lapid. They did his bidding because they depend on him for everything they do, but he never touched it. So this is what he's going to do. And I know we don't have time anymore, but I did want to mention, because we touched on Israel Hayom twice in this show, that you had quite an experience with them. And I was of the opinion that you should make this opinion public as you did in Israel. So can your viewers now get the benefit of the inside angle?
Oh, well, I was purged from Israel Hayom. They have a new regime there now. It used to be a paper that leaned to the right, and I was hired 3 years ago to strengthen that. But then the new government was formed a year ago, and 6 months ago, the editor, Boaz Bismuth, who was okay. He hired me. He was ousted or forced to quit or whatever you want to call it, and he was replaced by an apparatchik who was the magazine editor who had been censoring me for well nigh 3 years. And so he finally got around to firing me last week, which is pretty amazing. But I think, dear readers, we're going to be looking into some other options for publishing my columns. One of them is here, but, we got to make a living. So I think I may be turning to you guys for Substack subscriptions, and I will definitely make it worth your while. But that's just one of many business models that I'm looking at right now. So you just stay on this space, keep subscribing to this podcast and getting subscriptions to all of your
you
friends.
Have to pay for this. No, why don't you give grace to everyone who proves loyalty, so that anyone who wants to join you now will have to pay, but the original set of fans and listeners can get the same content free. How's that for a new business model, Carolyn?
Well, it's a free business model, which means it's not a business model, but we'll think about it. I'm my husband, who is a physicist, knows nothing about this, and neither do I. And so we're both going to be learning, and we're going to be figuring it out. And we will definitely let you know how this all turns out. But I don't think $1 a week is too much to ask. We'll see, and we'll just have to see how all of this goes. At any rate, I'm not going anywhere. This podcast is going to keep going on JNS because I like these guys, and we'll have to see how things follow. But we're living in very, very difficult political times, which is one of the reasons that Gadi and I actually started this podcast a year ago, because things have never really been this bad from a democratic perspective, whether we're talking about now the media and purging of journalists and censoring them and all the rest of it, that we've never had it this bad, at least in my 22 years in journalism in Israel. And, we have some very, very powerful forces who are trying to deny the people here in Israel, and I dare say in democracies around the world, their right to choose their government and their path as democracies. So we have to keep looking for and seeking out the information that we know is credible. I thank you guys very much for, putting me in that category, and we're just going to keep communicating, and we're going to keep getting the truth out, because the truth is our strongest and most powerful weapon and our best marketing tool. So we're going to keep talking about what's really happening. And I appreciate you guys listening to this and reading me and believing in me. And so we'll be going forward without hesitation to make sure that the cause of freedom in Israel and around the world is vigilantly defended. All right. So having put that out there, Did I do an okay job, Gadi?
Yeah, that was amazing.
It was all right. It was okay. All right. Well, listen, guys, thank you, Gadi. Thanks, Gadi, for coming back on. And we're going to have you practice your English forthwith, and you'll be back many times again to discuss the vicissitudes of Israeli democracy, or lack thereof, or at least its pathologies, as we move forward towards what will be very fateful elections, hopefully in October. All right, take care, everybody, and we'll talk to you next week.